Hello, BookTube. Well, I got mail today, but not books. Those of you who may be wondering about the weird lighting, it shows you the favor that I received directly from heaven. Okay? It's not a weird refraction from the ceiling light. Instead, it is the light shown upon me directly from heaven. So now you know, if you ever doubted it, who the perfect booktuber is. Okay? Anyway, I did get some mail. I got a couple of periodicals. I don't think I'm going to get books in the mail again for the foreseeable future. But it still feels weird. I'm weaning myself off sharing my mail with you. Because I was a classic old coot in a retirement home. I got into the habit of sharing my mail with you. So I thought we'd do that, especially since it's literary. And it's two magazines, two periodicals. And the first one is Vanity Fair. You wouldn't automatically associate that with literary. And this is the issue. Got the beautiful Reese Witherspoon on the cover. There's an article in here that's really good about the core, the little cabal of neo-Nazis in the U.S. State Department. These are the kinds of articles that we can just write openly in America in 2020. It's not just Stephen Miller, the loathsome Stephen Miller, who is the main policy advocate in the Trump White House. It's not just him. Of course, it couldn't be just him. Instead, there's a little vampire seedbed of a bunch of these creatures who have sensed that they can wheedle their way into power this way, and they will be there for a long time. Long after Donald Trump, they will be there. And there's a very good article about one of them, about one in particular of those. And there's also a really good article in here on a guy, a huckster, who claims he's innocent, of course, because we're in 2020. He claims he's innocent. He claims that he was set up and did nothing wrong, who sold England's Prince Charles a fake painting by a master. And the Vanity Fair has always had a sweet tooth for the British royals. You get some great stories about them. This is no different. It's tremendously entertaining. And it's also a bit of a profile on the new movie of West Side Story that Steven Spielberg is making. I haven't seen it yet. I haven't had a screener for it. It comes out in the summer, I believe. And it's it's going to be painful to watch, I think. I don't know for sure. There's the cast squaring off, the two rival gangs. It's the quote here that Spielberg gives is, the cast brought an authenticity. They brought themselves and everything they believed to the work. And you might think, okay, well, if this is a remake of West Side Story and it has Hispanic actors and actresses in it, in prominent roles, unlike the original, and has the great Marita Moreno in an older role in the movie, then maybe it will be authentic. And then you remember, if you didn't know already, that the main character, the main lead male, is played by Ansel Elgort, Barada Niktu, who is just this utterly talentless android who made a huge breakout in an adaptation of a John Green novel, and was a kind of an indie fan favorite for Baby Driver, mainly because he doesn't change his facial expressions throughout the whole movie. The most emoting that he ever does in the course of that entire 2 hours is when one character pulls his earpods out. And he is going to be in this adaptation of West Side Story as the charismatic male lead. He's going to sing and dance. I predict disaster, but we shall see. But the main story, that the reason why this is literary, is because Ann Patchett, the novelist Ann Patchett, who's also a bookstore owner, writes the profile of Reese Witherspoon in here and concentrates on her love of reading and her Reese Witherspoon book club that has brought a lot of reading to a lot of people and also changed a lot of authors' careers. She's, as Ann Patchett puts it in this interview, Reese Witherspoon has demonstrated her ability to transform a book into screen gold. She's demonstrated an instinct for knowing what will transmit to the big screen well. I think that's wonderful, but I went into the profile worried. Ann Patchett, of course, can't write a negative profile of this person, and I've never read a negative profile of Reese Witherspoon, but I thought, if there is a negative thing here, Ann Patchett can't write a negative profile, but Ann Patchett is first and foremost a novelist. And no matter what I might say about them on this channel, no matter what other people have said, the first and foremost job of the novelist is to tell the truth. Not the literal truth, but the literary truth. And so I thought, if there's a negative here, Anne Patchett won't be able to hide it. And if I read the article closely, I might see it and I might not want to. But I didn't. I didn't see anything like that. Instead, I see just that this is an incredibly busy young woman who still manages to love reading and wants that to be an active part of her life. That's wonderful. The blessings of the divinity on her. And at one point in the profile, she says something that would make her immediately the best friend of every booktuber in the world, because she's a busy businesswoman, an actress, and also a mother. And at one point in the interview, she mentions that there was one day where she was able to read without any interruptions for 4 hours at home. And she says with big exclamation points, she said it felt like a vacation. I imagine there are quite a few of you who could identify with that. I thought that was wonderful. And then the next thing, the other thing that came in the mail is the ultimate in literary. We go from Vanity Fair, which can sometimes intersect to literary, to the Times Literary Supplement, which is the greatest English language literary review journal in the world. And I want to take you just briefly through it. It had a lot of interesting stuff in it. Of course, the first thing I do when I get an issue of the TLS is look at the table of contents, not for the books that are being reviewed, but for who's doing the reviewing. I have to steel myself for who I'm going to see reviewing the books. It's all the table of contents. You can just look down the list of writers. You don't have to hunt around for it. I look at the table of contents first to see if any of the pieces in any issue are written by someone I hate. And in this particular case, there was only one, so I was doing okay. There are two types of people that I would look for here. The people I don't know, who I hate, and people I do know, who I hate. And if the table of contents has a long piece by someone I do know and hate, I sometimes I'm not able to read the whole issue. I just can't pick it up. I just don't want to. If there's an article by someone I don't know, an author that I don't know but that I hate, that's a little easier because I can just skip their piece. And I did that here with A.N. Wilson. A.N. Wilson is a historian, and the more I know about him, the more I read his works, especially as time goes on, as I read them in sequence. His latest book, I'm not going to not read his books, but the more I dislike the author, very much so. I might not be able to ignore his latest book. I can't in good conscience do that, but I can certainly ignore something that he does for the TLS. So I ignored his book on his piece on the prayer book. But there was quite a bit else here. There's a feature here called Literature, but really it's just rereading. It's by Nicholson Baker, and it got a lot of play on social media, where he goes back to the year 1920 and reads some of the books from that year. A typical literary journalism gimmick. Literary journalism loves anniversaries. They absolutely love doing stuff like this. But it can still be really good, and he does a really good job rereading some of the standout books from 1920. And then there's I don't know if we mentioned it. We saw it on this channel. There was a book called Inside the Critics Circle by Philippa Chong that was where she anonymously interviews a whole bunch of current reviewers, book reviewers, to sort of give an impression of what the world of book reviewing is like. And it elicited a letter from Gail Poole in Cambridge, Massachusetts, right across the river from Boston, who writes, "I enjoyed Sam Leith's review of Inside the Critics Circle by Philippa Chong. But as the author of Faint Praise, The Plight of Book Reviewing in America, I was surprised to see my work lumped together with a group of doomsaying articles." The doomsaying articles in quotes. That's the description that Sam Leith gives is that it's part of just another example of a doomsaying article. I realized that Leith was merely parroting something said by Chong, who was herself parroting Marie Giacola. But surely one of these three critics might have looked beyond my article's title to discover that it is in fact a book. And maybe even read at least the synopsis to see that, while critical, it isn't doomsaying. Books are often inaccurate, and if we reviewers merely quote without checking, we are just playing a game of telephone, passing along distorted bits of information. That's what I love the TLS's letter page for, because they go straight to stuff like that. Then the TLS uncovered a squib, a little 500-word squib by Somerset Maugham, and they reprinted here with a critical look. It didn't interest me much, but Mom doesn't. But then Sarah Lonsdale writes, there's a feature here called Rereading. I hope they continue it. She does a thing on Potterism, by Rose Macaulay, the writer Rose Macaulay, who I love. And I was loving it. I haven't read Potterism in so long. But I got to this paragraph and thought, wow, this reader gets Rose Macaulay, and so many don't. Let's see here. The hunt turned out to be an intellectual one. Macaulay's 23 novels, the first, Abbott's Verney, published just a few years after the death of Queen Victoria, and the last, The Towers of Trebizond, as Soviet tanks rumbled into Budapest, all burst at their frayed and stitched seams with the ideas of their time. Tumbling out of witty narratives come gender fluidity, eugenics, the popular press, class and religion, social control, forbidden love, the abuse of language, the literary marketplace, family loyalties and disloyalties, exile from childhood Eden, sea bathing, lots of this, as escape, impermanence, the madness of war, no subject left unexplored. And so between them, and beginning with Potterism, those novels of the 1920s provided a nuanced commentary on the society struggling to make sense of the cataclysm that had just befallen it. That is wonderful. that ought to be stamped on the back of every Rose Macaulay reprint from here to Timbuktu. That was great. I strongly recommend Rose Macaulay, what little of her you can probably find. And then there was, I think there were two other things that I wanted to mention in a tour through here. Yes, here we go. This is a piece by Jerry Palmer. It's called History, but it's really literary history. Look at this. Look at that painting, huh? That's from the cover of St. Nicholas magazine in 1927. And as you could tell from the painting, this is an article about the critical response to the writings of Lawrence of Arabia on the continent, in Europe rather than in England or in America. And it's fascinating. I could have read 200 more pages of this sort of thing. I hope I do. I hope this actually is a précis of a book that's coming out, because it was great. And it reminds the reader, much as myself, I am so grateful for Lawrence's book, Seven Pillars of Wisdom, that I tend to overlook things that I shouldn't. Things that I have to go to. I have every major English language biography of this figure. And I have to go back to those biographies in order to remind myself that his hands weren't clean. He wrote great prose, but his hands weren't clean, and this article goes through it all. Just fantastic job. So that was a great thing to do. And when I'm done with this issue, I will cut out that article and fold it carefully and put it in my copy of Seven Pillars of Wisdom. And then I thought there was something else here. There was one other thing that I thought struck me. Oh yes, here we go. Tom Lathan does a review of Reef Life by Callum Roberts, with an author's loving memoir of his travels into exotic locations all over the world and under the water, studying coral reefs and whatnot. I wrote a review of it. I really liked it, and there's a great paragraph here that I want to read you. Roberts' work has been eclectic. He has studied and cataloged ocean species, assessed damaged reef ecosystems, and served as chief scientific advisor for the BBC documentary Blue Planet 2. Much of Real Life focuses on Roberts' fieldwork in places such as Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and the Caribbean, locations most people associate with exotic beach holidays. The life of a coral reef scientist is anything but a holiday, however. On a research expedition in Saudi Arabia, he is awoken each morning by, quote, the fly alarm clock, fat, black tormentors that alight on lips and investigate noses and ears. Perhaps attracted by the gritty patina of sand and salt crust he has acquired after several days of diving. Sometimes it is government authorities that make his life difficult. In Sharm el-Sheikh, for example, Roberts is hired to establish a research center, but he is forced to leave when President Hosni Mubarak decides to holiday at the site. Later, Mubarak approves planning permission for a luxury hotel to be built in the research center's place. Unsurprisingly, it often seems Roberts is more at home underwater than on land. This is, again, a perfect example. I will clip this out and put it in my copy of Reef Life because I thought the book was really enjoyable. And that is the TLS. The last thing we do, their columnist, JC, often takes pot shots at the end. JC writes about American Dirt, Janine Cummins, and the whole own authorship, own voices controversy. But their From the Archives piece is from 1920. Yes, 1920. This is a review of a book called Shakespeare, identified as Edward de Vere, the 17th Earl of Oxford, by J. Thomas Loney, from 1920. This is a hallmark text of the Shakespearean authorship controversy. And they're from the archive section. They just reprint the whole review from 1920. I was kind of amazed The reviewer is A.W. Pollard, who was a really good historian, really readable historian. I was kind of amazed at what a fair shake he gives the book. It would be such an easy thing for someone like Pollard to just knock it all around the park, and he doesn't do that. Instead, he gives it a generous, serious read. Oh, that was fascinating. And there you go. So it's not a mail haul. It was two things that came in the mail, and who knows how long it'll be. Excuse me. Who knows how long it'll be before these things also stop? Before periodicals stop coming in the mail. I would hope not. I would hope that it's mostly machine handled, but you never know. I'll keep apprising you of my literary mail as long as I keep getting it, if you're interested. But in the meantime, I'm gonna wrap this up. But I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.